Good afternoon, and thank you for joining Stop Pests today for our online training, Tools for Eliminating Mice in Multifamily Housing. I'm Susanna Reese, the project manager for Stop Pests in Housing, and we bring you these free training opportunities through funding from an interagency agreement between HUD's Office of Healthy Homes and Lead Hazard Control and the USDA's National Institute for Food and Agriculture. It's my pleasure today to introduce you to today's speaker, one of our nation's or maybe the world's leading experts on rodents, Dr. Bobby Corrigan. Dr. Corrigan has been in the pest management industry for over 30 years. First as a pest control technician, so he's got a lot of field experience before studying and becoming a faculty member at Purdue University. He works full-time as a rodentologist and a consultant who advises housing, industrial facilities, even city governments on IPM and rodent control. He's author of Rodent Control, Practical Guide for Pest Management Professionals, and the Rats and Mice chapter in the 10th edition of the Malice Handbook of Pest Control. And countless articles and papers. And I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to attend the New York City Rodent Academy. It's a 3-day intensive course with the New York City Health Department, and they've hosted that since 2003. And now this Rodent Academy has expanded to multiple cities. So if it's in your city, I highly recommend applying for it. It's really an honor to have Dr. Corrigan here with us today to discuss a topic that I know is very important to him. Mice are often overlooked as pests in housing because bed bugs and cockroaches seem to steal the spotlight and our time and resources. And I agree with Dr. Corrigan that we can't overlook or accept infestations of mice because of the public health threat that they pose. They can trigger asthma attacks and they carry diseases. So it's my hope that the over 500 people that are on this training today or registered for this training will take these strategies back to your work and to your homes and make those homes, those places, a little healthier places to live and work. And that is our mission at Stop Pests in Housing. I just want to let you know briefly that Stop Pests in Housing provides on-site IPM training and technical assistance for housing staff at federally funded sites, including public housing, project-based Section 8 housing, and tribal housing. I encourage you to visit the website and hit the request training button if you're interested in the training, or contact me at stoppests@cornell.edu for more information. Additionally, our website houses hundreds of resources related to pest control in affordable housing. So please do visit the website, and I think I have a picture here of the website and the pest solutions page, the request training, some online trainings, all sorts of resources. So today, the presentation is going to run for approximately 90 minutes, and we'll leave time at the end to answer your questions. Because we have so many people on, everybody is muted, but you can use the chat feature to ask your questions. I have a little. So if you either have your controls at the bottom or the top of the screen, and you have to scroll your mouse over the top or the bottom of the screen for those features to appear, and some of you might have to hit the More button to find the chat feature. I would like to use just the chat feature, not the Q&A, so we can have all the questions in one place. At the end of the presentation, I'll read Dr. Corrigan the questions. There will not be a break, so you can feel free to get up and take a break at any time. The presentation is being recorded, and it'll be posted on the Stop Pest website in a few days. The website will also host a PDF of the presentation and some related resources. And if you need a certificate of completion, you can find one on the same website. You can go to stoppest.org/go/mouse webinar. I think I have that up. And somehow I stopped sharing, but I think we're almost ready to go anyway. So I want to thank you for joining us and thank Dr. Corrigan. I'm honored to have him presenting today. And Bobby, you can try to start sharing your screen now, and I'm going to turn over the presentation. And bear with us a moment, audience, to stop. And it's working, luckily. And if you're ready to go, I will let you take away the presentation. Thanks so much again for being here.
Thanks, Susanna. Hello to everybody. This is Bobby Corrigan. And as Susanna mentioned, I will be leading the discussion today on this webinar for tools for eliminating mice in multifamily housing. So thank you all for being here. I do want to start out by saying, and you're hopefully going to get this message clearly that, this is a public health urban pest. It is a public health urban rodent, of course, and this does take lots of cooperation. Stop Pests in Housing with the Northeastern IPM Center pretty much began to concept this and put it together, and joined by HUD's Office of Healthy Homes and Lead Hazard Control, and also, as you can see there, the U.S. Department of Agriculture's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. And, so these are the three groups and agencies kind of heading this up. I do also want to stress that behind the scenes here, there are a whole long list of multifamily housing complexes that we've worked in over the past decade that indirectly contribute to this message being put together. So, and some of you are probably on this webinar, you know who you are, and our thanks to you as well. I'd also like to say a special thanks to Susanna. This goes back months, and Susanna planning this, organizing logistics and so forth. There's a lot of details behind the scenes to get these things done and get them done smoothly as is happening today. So thank you, Susanna, and thank you for getting this and organizing this. Let's jump right in, everybody. I do want to stress this is not a session. This is not a webinar all about the mouse. This is not about basic biology behavior, other than we're going to show how this animal that you see in front of you, the ordinary, if it is ordinary, it's quite extraordinary. The mouse inhabits and becomes a nuisance and a health pest, and specifically in multifamily housing. So this is not about single family housing, and this is not about schools and so forth. This is very focused on that animal and how it takes advantage in apartment buildings of all different shapes and sizes. I do want to at least recognize that for what it's worth, I think we should, as a species, as the human species, recognizing another mammal species on our planet, we in fact are looking at the second most successful mammal on planet Earth, right? So I like to point that out because it's important to keep in mind with that kind of a status, controlling mice in multifamily housing buildings and apartments and schools and everything requires us to be organized. It requires us to realize that just laying down a snap trap or a glue sticky board or a piece of bait is really not a good match for trying to control these animals in a sophisticated way. So anyway, that's our mouse. Mus musculus, translated means little thief. And its origins, for what it's worth, are right now, if you look at a map, it originated in the area of Turkmenistan and made its way all around the globe and all throughout cities and all throughout the buildings of our cities. It's ubiquitous, it's every place, and it has certainly my admiration as a scientist who studies it day in, day out. If we queue up the topic of the day, of course, multifamily housing and apartment buildings come in all shapes, sizes, all different, floors. Some of them are massive. Some of them are small, single family. We all get it, that the diversity that's associated with apartment buildings goes on and on and on. So, we can look at all different angles and the different construction types. Part of the take-home message to this is this little guy, the little mouse, as most people know, it only takes the size of a dime of a hole in a building for it to gain entry and then move about. And so if we look at this, apartment building right here in front of us, it's massive. And if we think of the number of nooks and crannies that the house mouse can fit into with its family, it goes into the hundreds of thousands. And pipe chases and linear pathways and voids, wall voids, floor voids, ceiling voids, appliance voids. You can see that right there in front of us, just that one tall multifamily housing complex potentially can house thousands and thousands of mice. And I want to stress right at the get-go here to this webinar that that, in fact, is part of this animal's difficulty in getting control of it. Because when someone says, well, how do you get control of a population of mice in a building like that? And that's what we have to consider, is we're looking at a building that has a population at a building level, not just a list of 12, 13 apartments that needs monthly service because they saw a mouse. We've been doing that for over a century, and we're really, in many cases, not getting very far. So I want us to start out with this complexity. It is complex. It's as complex, if not more complex, than cockroaches and bedbugs. And so if we look at this, and again, different ages, we're looking at some pre-wars here, right, in New York City, for example, and old construction that gradually over time, walls separate, cracks and crevices, floors begin to separate from walls and so forth. And as they separate over time, of course, you have a small little mammal that can squeeze through the whole size of a dime. They're going to infiltrate all components of our buildings, new and old. So the question, to some degree, I'm always asking myself, and as Susanna pointed out a little bit, I think all of us around the globe, no matter where you are, for those of you listening from Canada and Puerto Rico today and different states, in general, we tend to have overlooked this little guy because it's so ubiquitous. It's common. It's every place. And I would even put a little bit of a culture in here, is it's also so Disney. I think most of us, many of us, grew up with the whole thing of mice are cute, Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, cartoons. To this day, cartoons are very prevalent with how cute mice are. They're a big part of our culture, of little stuffed toys and so forth. And so we're not quite so repulsed nor alarmed when we see a mouse someplace. We don't want them in our living quarters, but we don't react in the same way that we do for, say, bed bugs in our bedroom, obviously, or cockroaches in the kitchen. Sometimes we're a little bit too accepting of an animal that in many ways sure may be part of our culture. There's nothing cute about this animal's diseases, and there's nothing cute about some of the damage it does and so forth. So here we have, inside an apartment, within a cabinet. This is real. These are pictures that I've taken. Every picture you see when I'm out, I've taken. So you can see our little buddy here. Was in pitch black, the middle of the night. He's simply sitting on top of our soups, stripping labels off oatmeal and what have you, urinating and defecating the whole way. And so this is what they do. And there's nothing cute about this, nothing Disney about this whatsoever. But, thereabouts. Now, obviously, but I do want to emphasize a couple things. When mice are present in our homes, in our apartments, in our dormitories, wherever you might think, we all use the word scurry. I saw a mouse scurry. So, of course, when mice are present, they're scurrying over the floors, the chairs, our beds. When we're not home, they may run across our pillows, the kitchen, everything in the kitchen where there's food smells and food residues, and obviously plates, utensils, toys that are on the floor, clothes, and so forth. As you see there in yellow, as I mentioned, while they're doing that, they are constantly urinating and defecating. And just to get rid of a myth, by the way, it's not true that rodents can't control themselves. They can control themselves, but they mark pheromones. They process their liquids and their foods quickly. So mice and rats also, they're constantly urinating and defecating, but it's not because they can't control it. That's like an urban myth. And all those things I just mentioned, it's very important to put in text here. We, of course, are touching all of that with our hands and our fingers, and everyone probably in this webinar realizes, it's our hands and our fingers and our fingernails where, as we touch things, we, like shovels, scrape viruses and bacteria and organisms below our fingernails or in between cracks on our skin and what have you. So those are the kinds of things we all know, whether it be mice or the cold flu or worse, that's how we acquire problems. And so if mice are visiting our apartments and our bedrooms and our kitchens and they're scrambling and scurrying over everything, we're touching those things, including, of course, children touching their toys and so forth, or being on the ground where the mouse is running. So it's a situation that this animal is a potential health pest in homes and apartments. I'm very careful with my words to say potential, because It's not as though every single mouse and every single rat and every single cockroach is transmitting some very dangerous pathogen. But therein is the issue, is it's potentially transmitting something. And we can't afford to play some type of disease lottery when we allow these animals into our buildings and our homes, and thus the importance of pest management and doing it correctly and so forth and so on. So, but if we do look at specifics of this animal, I'd like to use the opening sentence to a very outstanding paper by Meerberg in 2009, who's opened his paper, his distinguished paper, by saying rodents play a significant role in the transmission of a large number of diseases to humans and their livestock. And that definitely, of course, plays to the house mouse, and it fits it very, very well. If we look at the big picture, for example, if you were to review the literature from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and many other departments of health, it shakes out in the big picture like this. The type of pathogen on the left, the number of diseases on the right that are specific to rodent-borne. And you can see bacterial lead the list here, 20, the viruses right behind them with 17, rickettsial, protozoans, and dropping down to significant numbers. That's, of course, a very significant impact by rodents in our city environments and our dwellings and our buildings and our restaurants and schools and so forth, right? And if we were to take the mice and separate them out and just inside buildings, they can serve as both reservoirs and mechanical vectors of what you see right there on the screen. And in fact, leading the top, which isn't a pathogen at all, but a protein. So in the urine, as we'll talk about, of mice and other rodents, there's mouse urinary proteins, of which, just like we all know about peanut proteins and causing asthma and allergens to children and people. So right there with the mouse, as we'll review in a second, allergens are right on top. But with the mouse, we also have congenital toxoplasmosis issues. We have lepto, murine typhus. I was just out in Texas last week, and murine typhus is making an emergence in some parts of Fort Worth, Dallas, Texas, which of course is of a concern. We have foodborne illness bacteria, a long list right there, rat bite fever, lymphocytic choriomeningitis, and others. So, I would leave as a homework assignment to everyone in the webinar is if you wish to get more information on this, you're only a button away for pushing the Centers for Disease Control and reading up on any of these and many other sources available to you on the web through the power of Google. So here's our little guy. There's a male house mouse, and he's got his family surrounding coming in when I took his picture. Again, it's the middle of the night, pitch black, foraging about inside an apartment type of area and feeding on little crumbles of food. The mouse is part of its success is it doesn't really need much. Only 2 grams, 3 grams of food every 24 hours gets it done. And the animal remains healthy, and it can forage on all kinds of foods in our apartments, and they can lick grease off the edges of stove and be fine. Pick up a little tiny piece of saltine crack that fell on the floor that maybe we don't even see it because we're so busy, and it went underneath the cabinet, so forth and so on. But there he is doing its thing, very common. These animals on that body I just showed you, of course, can also have those parasites, ectoparasites that live underneath their fur and on their skin and in their body. With the house mouse, they commonly carry the tropical rat mite. Even it's called a rat mite. It's commonly found on the house mouse, very common in fact. And second to that, we can have the house mouse mite, appropriately named, which is involved in the rickettsial transmission. So it's the mice, it's their pathogens, it's their habits, and it's also their own parasites on the outside that can shake off, drop off, wander about, and bite people, and so forth, and cause vectors of pathogens. Just for the record, a lot of people are amazed to see, but some research, some really great research out of the University of Texas a couple of years ago published, and they were able to demonstrate that an adult male dominant house mouse, for example, can generate up to 3,000 micro droplets of urine in a 24-hour period. All right, so we can see right away that that number is a holy cow number, but again, I want to stress it's micro droplets, but even on a micro droplet, everyone probably knows you can fit an awful lot of viruses, an awful lot of bacteria. So it's not the point that it's a tiny, tiny droplet of urine, the point that it is something coming out of the body of which we can get many, many micropathogens involved. And that leads, and those are made up of mouse urinary proteins, which heads the list in causing allergen issues. Now, there are many papers. Again, if you wish to dive into this and read up on the subject, many papers, if you get into the Google search bar and just put rodent allergies, rodent research and allergies, we could go on and on here. I'm just queuing us up as to the topic, and allergy to rodents, an update. If we move on and, it shows just a summary to that particular paper where it stresses the importance of children that are exposed and sensitive to those proteins. And they discussed, as you can see in the last sentence, the risk factors for rodent allergies and mechanisms of tolerance to rodent allergens are discussed in their paper. So, and here's another title, with a list of distinguished epidemiologists and biologists, mouse allergens in urban elementary schools and homes of children with asthma, and many of those scientists that you see there listed in the bar are the same scientists, same group that were the original science and papers published on cockroach allergens out of Johns Hopkins and other University of Massachusetts and Harvard. I mean, these are prestigious work and scientists done addressing this animal. So, without spending time, but these are the kinds of things you can read up on your own. You can see, again, these are good referee journals, the Annals of Allergy and Asthma Immunology and so forth. We stress this because this animal in apartments, in my opinion and many others, is simply unacceptable, especially if there's children. And so, we see mouse and cockroach allergens, a 1-2 punch, in this particular case in northeastern United States and inner city public high schools, right? Again, some famous scientists and epidemiologists here. So without beating it to death, you guys, I think we all can agree that this is not just a nuisance little mouse that scurries along the kitchen floor that we just have to take care of. It's an animal that threatens us in being a nuisance and threatens our public health. So the point is, it is an important public health pest in housing, and it's not any less so than the cockroach, which of course with allergens. And Susanna mentioned when we first started bed bugs. I just want to pause for a moment because I think, the past 5 years, we've all seen how much attention and money and media and so forth has gone to the bed bug reemergence around the globe. And tremendous amount of attention, tremendous amounts of money, tremendous amounts of inspection techniques for bed bugs because we find them completely unacceptable when they move into our apartments or hotels and schools and so forth. And that's current to this day. Yet sometimes I'm a little bit frustrated thinking, well, of course, bed bugs, nobody wants them. Nobody wants bed bugs sucking their blood while they're sleeping. But at the very least, the bed bug is not transmitting pathogens, and maybe someday we'll find that they are, and that there's a link. But on the other hand, we have the house mouse that can be involved up with, dozens of diseases and transmits pathogens and has been shown to transmit pathogens and is involved with allergens. And yet it doesn't get anywhere close to the attention that we've given bed bugs. So to me, just as a pest management specialist, I'm always amazed at why do we overlook this animal? What is it about that? But it is what it is. And we'll just, have to deal with it for now. Hopefully, those changes are coming. Of course, we all can relate to that's not acceptable. That German cockroach right there in abundant numbers and eateries or apartments or homes. nor the bed bugs, as we just mentioned, not acceptable, and nor should be the mouse. So here I put, this is a common photograph that I see all the time working in multifamily housing complexes. And by the way, and I want to stress, it's multifamily housing. This is not to imply it's a certain type of housing or socioeconomic housing. This crosses all paths. The mouse infests the highest end of condominiums in multifamily housing in the world, and it infests socioeconomic lower levels of apartments and perhaps low-income housing. It infests equally across the board. What we see right there in the red circle is, believe it or not, all that dirt that you see in that greasy dirt where the radiators meet and above the radiators, that's all from mice. And that's all mouse urine, that's mouse grease, that's mouse smearing, that's fecal material that has been crushed into that from the heavy activity at that particular corner, because mice love corners, especially warm corners. And if you live in this apartment and you have children in that apartment sensitive to these proteins, all of that's being volatilized by the heat when the heat is on, day in, day out, and inhaled by the inhabitants of that apartment. Not to mention all the scurrying that's going on from those mice onto plates and pots and pans, and as I mentioned. Here is the side, and none of these pictures, I want to stress, none of these pictures am I showing extreme cases. I'm not showing extreme cases. I'm showing cases that are typical of when mice move into apartments. They're not typical in terms of cleaning. Of course, we could say right now, well, that needs to be cleaned. It certainly does. But some of these pictures, to get them, you have to move heavy appliances, squeeze below things, behind things, and to see what's going on out of sight. And such is the case here. You can see my yellow arrow. Again, mice love to be around warmth. They love to be around radiators, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. But they leave their scent, they leave their pheromones, and it builds up and becomes very obvious, because what you're looking at is definitely not ordinary, quote, dirt. You can see, and again, I'll come back to this, but you'll see, they've made some attempts. They put some glue boards down on the floor, which are no longer effective. They're covered with dirt and dust and what have you, right? So this has to be done right. This has to be done right. Now, I think part of it is if we're organized, if we get organized, because it can be overwhelming in thought, is, okay, we get it. This animal's a health pest. It's a nuisance. We can't tolerate it inside of multifamily housing and apartments or any place. We really can't tolerate this animal. But getting organized, with the little mouse, where it seems to be every place and all the rooms, infesting all the kinds of things, can be at first a little daunting. So what I try to do is just break it down into pieces and parts that enable us to understand what the typical apartment mice tend to do when they move into an apartment. They have a very predictable way they will fill in an apartment. And so I'm just going to call them, for the lack of organization here, not for the lack of science, but I'm going to call them the types of mouse infestations, right? So I'm naming these mice according to their harborage areas within apartments, not, that the mice have different harborages. Well, we do, but over the years, and as Susanna mentioned, I've been doing this a long time. I did a lot of mouse cleanouts in multifamily housing on my own exterminating route, saving money for college. And you see a very predictable pattern with mice when they move into apartments. And so what I'd like to do is categorize these mice according to, if you were to walk into an apartment, let's say that has more than a single mouse below the kitchen sink, how does it go when these mice multiply and begin to have families, and you end up with a couple dozen mice inside an apartment? How does that go? So let's do that. Let's look at the types of mice according to how they divide up if you will, an apartment. By the way, I will mention mice are extremely territorial and aggressive with their territories. And so definitely the mice and the strongest mice will, for example, as you'll see, they will take over the kitchen and they will defend that kitchen, and because obviously it's close to the food source. And after that, the territories become secondary, tertiary, and so forth. But they are territorial, and the strongest mice will defend the closest food sources and warmth and other resources aggressively. So before I actually break these down, I'm going to give the big picture here. They set up these nests inside apartments. Obviously, it's a mammal. This type of mammal sets up a nest, a formal nest that has protection and soft materials from which to maintain heat, and they can have their babies and rest and bring food back and so forth. The big picture looks like these 6 areas that I'm going to come back to. But notice number 1 starts out with the word warm. So number 1 is warm floor voids beneath radiators, right? Those are very popular, and I just showed you for example, those 2 cases of high activity around the radiators. But the little mouse needs warmth because the little mouse has a weak spot in its biology, and that is it has very low body mass inside. When you look at a mouse, inside there's everything's tiny, everything's small heart, small stomach, small lungs. So it has low body mass, but high surface volume. So it has that body that stretches out and has a very long tail relative to the body. It has a long tail, and when you have low body mass to high surface volume, surface area, you're always losing body heat. And so you have to stay warm or be by warmth or constantly eat to survive well. So we have the warm floor voids beneath radiators. We have what I call canyons and caves of the kitchen, right? As I'll come to. We have furniture voids below the couches, our chairs, our beds, where there's cushions and insulation and stuffing, it all adds up to a nice nesty area. Obviously, we have wall voids, and some wall voids will have insulation of all different types, or they may have a hot water pipe running through them to generate the warmth. As human beings, we love cardboard boxes. We love them too much. We probably, all of us are guilty. I know I am. Sometimes I look in my closet and I'm like, gee, my boxes are beginning to multiply and I need to get organized. So they love those boxes. They love the back box and the bottom shelf behind and out of sight of everything. And finally, of course, they love pantry boxes that, are out of reach, out of mind. Maybe we forgot we bought a box of some kind of food item and, we didn't really care for it, but we didn't want to throw it out. We put it way up in the back of the pantry and they will literally move into those. So that's just 6. Now, for academic exercise, we can list off all the places the house mouse takes advantage of, and it goes into the dozens. But we're not going to do that. But you can see in the bottom here, I have like bed bugs, only a bit more space. In other words, part of the trick in bed bugs, as all the bed bug experts know, and everybody that's been involved in bed bugs, where do we find them hiding from us? It goes on and on and on. And so you have to be a real Sherlock Holmes to get to mice. You have to be a Sherlock Holmes to get to bed bugs. If we look at these groups, I'm going to start with the kitchen mice. Obviously, in most cases, if a mouse or 2 moves into somebody's apartment, or they get brought in, say, in a box from the grocery store, which happens all the time, you're going to have 4 different types of kitchen mice that begin to harbor up. They will move literally in, as I'm going to show, into our appliances. They will live in the appliances. So as we can see here, they will move into stoves. They will broiler voids down below, the insulated walls on the side. They will set up nests right below the burner plates that you can lift up. Everybody can lift up. Most cases, they burn a plate on every single stove. Well, some people don't realize it, that they can do that. And when they do, it's a big surprise for, food fragments and grease, what have you. They will move into the refrigerator. not inside the refrigerator, of course, where we put our goods to keep cool, but everyone knows the refrigerator walls have insulation to keep the refrigerator cold. And there's a compressor void in the back that generates, the coolants and so forth. And those motor voids, the compressor motor voids, that's a big cave back there that's toasty warm up against the wall. And so the mice move in there. Same for the dishwasher. You pull out a dishwasher, and I'll show you, and down below you have these mice all harbored up below the dishwasher for the same purposes. When the hot water's going, when the motor's going, there's really warm, nice temperatures, very humid. So all those three right there for appliance mice in yellow. The thing you see that's common, in addition to the caves and the darkness and the great protection, is the word warmth. Number two, we have the very classic kitchen sink cabinet base. That's in virtually every single type of kitchen cabinet. And we all know below the floor of your kitchen cabinet base, if you look at your own, there's a void down there. It's a hollow. A lot of times I call it a mouse cave, because if there's any pipes going through it or any holes in it or crevices in the back, the mouse moves down and lives in that beautiful dark cave where, again, it's close to food and it's warm. Number three, we have the kitchen wall mice, which is probably obvious. However, as you can see there, I have in parentheses, usually they prefer the walls that are close to anything generating the warmth. So the wall void behind the stove, for example, we begin to comply. You say, where is the number one wall void, perhaps? Is you go back up to the appliances. Wherever your stove meets the wall, refrigerator and dishwasher meets the wall, those are prime real estate for this little species. Many times, because there are appliances, they need all types of utilities, maybe electrical, maybe gas lines coming to a stove. It could be the plumbing lines coming in to the dishwasher, the hot and the water sink and so forth. But the bottom line is they prefer those walls where the temperature keeps them nice and warm and have to spend constant time eating to stay warm. And finally, of course, as you might imagine, pantries of different types. Some of us, in some apartments, we have closets. Some have full walk-in pantries. Some have small areas. But any walls and ceilings, any boxes, as I mentioned earlier, as you can see there, is going to provide harborage for these guys. And they move in. And so that's our kitchen mice right there. We have, a whole harborage of options for these animals, and I do want to just take a moment to show what I meant by appliance canyons and caves. If we take a perspective on our stoves, dishwasher, refrigerators, and sink cabinet voids that I just mentioned, we begin to see a kitchen. And if we just step back on an everyday kitchen, quite common, nothing out of the ordinary, but here's a small New York City kitchen, and we have our appliances, the fridge, the dishwasher right next, the microwave on top, the sink, and the sink cabinet below, the stove leading over to the cabinet. But if we look at each of these areas, going all the way to the left of the refrigerator, look at the canyon we have. A big, dark, and very narrow, not easy to clean. If you're going to clean that on your day off or whomever, you're going to have to pull out that refrigerator. If you don't, you're not going to get below that refrigerator, and there's going to remain a canyon to the left, a big, tall canyon, and a cave to the bottom. All the way around that very tiny kitchen is the same scenario. I think we can all appreciate, for example, when we're using a stove. If we go over to the stove and we see the burners, and we have a very narrow canyon right next to the stove where it meets the cabinet and the wood top. Well, for cockroaches, German cockroaches, anyone knows anything about cockroaches, that is one of the best real estates in the whole apartment. Well, down at the base, similarly, the same exact thing for the mouse. So it's canyons and caves, canyons and caves. we don't access those areas properly, those mice remain completely protected against traps and glue boards and what have you, except when they come out to forage about. But accessing the nests are a critical component. So here we just dropped the camera down to get a closer perspective. And of course, we're now beginning to get into mouse land and mouse perspective. And even with stoves, for example, to the right that are used a lot, the mice can live in the stove component while the stove is being used, depending on where it is, as I'll show you. But right there in front of my camera with a wide angle lens on it is mouse land, all the way across. Refrigerator, dishwasher, cabinet, stove to the right, mouse land. And so you can have 30 mice easily occupying what you see in front of you, 30. And if food is spilled a lot or things are not cleaned up, they're going to all sustain themselves right there. But pretty soon, they will get crowded. They will begin to bicker. They will begin to fight. And some mice will be forced out to perhaps the nearest living room with a big couch or something like we'll go to in a second. So here is a team of us and with Stop Pests, for example, doing some analysis and keeping notes and what have you. And you'll notice, in fact, here's Suzanne Reese, taking some notes as we're going through this. And right in front of Suzanne, I put a star on that stove. That's a blue star. That's my clipboard to the right here. And the reason, we're doing this, again, it's a very typical kitchen in a multifamily housing building and experiencing chronic repeating mice. And we're asking for help as to, I just don't know what's going on here. But there's mice living in that stove, right, directly in the stove. But yet all the control tools are out of harm's way, out of foot traffic way in different parts of the apartment. They're not going to touch those mice. So we begin to take close-ups. That's my red box, my green arrow. We do have to think about the size of a mouse, just like we would if this was cockroaches or bed bugs. But there's one of those canyons, right? There's a canyon between the cabinet and the appliance. And you'll see all that darkened stain where the green arrow points to. That is all mouse. And the reason I select this picture to show is because mice, when they travel, the same with rats, but mice, when they travel, the grease of their bodies, which is called sebum, S-E-B-U-M, you make sebum, I make sebum, they make sebum. The sebum rubs off as they roll about and travel about. They don't use shampoo every morning like we do. So that's mouse sebum and mouse urine and mouse fecal pellets, all of which, and many of which, contain pheromones that communicate to other mice all kinds of messages, everything from reproduction to aggression to, family members and so forth. Well, we're going to the bottom of the stove. As you can tell, we pulled out the broiler plate and here we are. Now, what's important about this, obviously you'll see my red arrow, you'll see my green arrow, okay? And I'm pointing down because in the track that's used, as you slide your broiler plate in and out in most stoves, it slides along a track. Well, we pulled that plate out and you can see not pleasant, and everyone should do this. Whether or not you have mice, you should do this to see whether or not you're detailed cleaning. But what you can see here, which is very common, again, I'm not showing anything that is extraordinary just for the point of making a point. This is common. There is a mouse nest in the track, and they pulled the stuffing from out of right next door was a living room with a couch, and they were just pulling the stuffing out and dragging it across the floor, running with it quickly in the middle of the night and using the stuffing from the couch for their beds in the stove. And then they'll go up into the stove itself and they'll supplement that and use it and pull the insulation out of the stove wall and pull it down and out and begin to pack it there. So we had combinations of different kinds of stuffing from different areas. But the point is, that was a healthy, ongoing mouse nest that is perfectly happy between those two large appliances. You'll also notice with my green arrow that, there was a homeowner's level attempt, if you will, of plugging up a hole where the electrical line and the gas lines go into the walls, another common area. And foam, as we're going to discuss in a little bit, is not an appropriate material for sealing mice out. It's a quick plug, but it actually causes more problems in the end than it's worth. So it's not a tool material that should be used. Right. Notice on the right of the screen here, you'll notice, of course, we have the electrical cord of the appliances literally stuck in the glue itself. So one is, we have to be careful where we put these kinds of tools, and two is now to clean that, it's quite annoying to get that all undone and cleaning, use oils and so forth and what have you. I probably want to use this spot to emphasize the fact that, again, this is common. And when we do turn over our stoves and our ovens and we generate heat, and we have all that urine here. We have all this urine as part of the base. We have all these droppings you can see spread throughout here. And of course, what happens when we turn on our stoves to cook our own food is, to be quite frank about it, we are volatilizing fecal material and urine material into the kitchen air, to which we want our food to be pure, but it is not going to be. So it's like that. And so when someone says, oh, it's just a little mouse, I'm going to take pause with that every single time. And here's a different stove. Same, in this particular case, same apartment, same appliances were installed. You can see the heavy-duty sebum before we look at our little buddy here, but at the top of this electrical cord to the right of the circle, that's all mouse sebum, all mouse grease as they come across. Again, an attempt to use foam to plug up a crevice that mice are coming out from below the wall where it meets the floor. There in the glue trap that was put out is, you can see, a captured mouse, which in fact was alive when I took this picture. Please look all the way to the left. Again, this is a different stove, same scenario, all the way to the left. That one little tiny corner there with the black contained, a favorite mouse nest. So, and you'll also look all the way to the right, you'll see shredded foil that was a chocolate morsel inside a foil. And mice just love to grab foils of all different types, and they like to gnaw through them and chew them all up into different pieces. There's a whole relationship between mice and foils, shiny foils, and licking them for food services and whatnot. Sometimes I wonder, if mice, if that's their propensity to have their own little jewelry or something. I don't know, but you always see, little medals associated with this animal. So here's an angle on what I just showed. Again, this is the same picture showing the broiler plate and cavity actually pulled out. And of course, yes, these things we have to clean, and otherwise that grease to the left is going to feed mice day in, day out. They, just like us, they will get nutrition from grease and from foods and meats and drippings. So, and as we talk about it in a little bit, obviously, as we're going to see, everybody's going to have a role in mouse control in apartment buildings. Certainly the tenants, the superintendents, the property owners, the pest professionals. But it's probably obvious, but if it isn't, I've just stated, now controlling mice does require detailed cleaning. If we're not going to detail clean, it's going to be very difficult to have any kind of magic wands to take care of these animals. Well, here's, of course, a utility wall, side view, beautifully points out that, when you use your sink and when tenants use their sinks, there's hot water, cold water, there's a drain pipe, it all leads to the plumbing tree and so forth and so on. And all the way to the top of apartment buildings and all the way to the bottom, we can have dozens and dozens and even hundreds of these exact wall voids for every apartment as we go through. The reason I put this picture in here, of course, is the mice travel those lines. And so you can have a mouse family move into the first floor, become established. And let's just pretend that when he did that and they found the first apartment on the first floor, okay, but not great. The person's pretty darn clean. And so the mouse, being the mouse, likes to explore, will climb those pipes and go to another floor and come out, if they can, through the walls and forge about till they get to a place where it's a heavy reward of food's easy, and perhaps the right kind of food, and perhaps the right kind of temperatures and so forth. But the point is, all of these utilities and kitchens and bathrooms are connected. So as the saying goes with pests, including bed bugs and cockroaches, as we all know, is many of us are only as safe as our neighbors when it comes to pests. However, I'm going to come back to that point in a little bit, because of course you can, and tenants can, seal up their own domains without a big to-do. And so any place of penetration, like a hot water pipe or cold water pipe or drainage pipe, goes into a penetrating wall that connects to other utility chases. It should, of course, be sealed and sealed correctly. And I'm going to come back to that because it's one of the most important things we can do. When people say, how can I control the mice in my apartment building? I say, well, let's start with the big picture and work our way down to at least protecting yourself very well from all others. I just wanted to share this. Again, in my world, I've been doing lots of inspections since I am a rodentologist, but I pulled the plate off a dishwasher and in a mouse-infested apartment, and I just wanted to show the extent of the damage. If we put the diseases aside, if we put the allergens aside, if we put the fact that they frighten people and all of that aside, we also end up back at a point where they're costly little monsters, they'll get into our appliances and just gnaw everything up, and, you talk to the appliance repair people and say, how often do you see wires just chewed up by mice? And they'll all say all the time, one of the most common repairs we have to do is the line was shorted out because mice chewed on the wires and so forth. So right here, that is all mouse. And you can see their droppings, and they just ripped it. They rip into it, they rip through it. And not just here, they do this on cars and planes. They do it on airplanes. So it's in the kitchen, destructive little guys. We have heating register mice. So we had kitchen mice with those areas. We have the heating register mice. Again, you can't see it here, but where the heating line that feeds that particular heating duct right there drops into the floor, if there's any space around that, they will drop down that space and live in the nook and cranny below the floor where they're getting all the heat from the heating duct. Now, unfortunately, and you'll see my red arrow there, and people try, people are like, well, maybe I'll try this to keep them out. And they'll get a can of spray foam, which is what you see here, and earnestly hoping they're doing the right thing, will do that. They'll put a big bead of spray foam out, and sometimes it actually feels good to even do that. You feel like you're accomplishing something. But again, I want to stress that that's probably a step backwards in terms of controlling mice in buildings and apartments. One is the mice will gnaw through that easily, no problem whatsoever. And two is when they gnaw through it, they'll actually carry it back to the nest and use it for insulation. And it's tremendous good insulation. So, and it collects residues and molecules of food, and you can't clean it, and so it can harbor bacteria. It's just not the best thing to do. It's not the smart thing to do. It in many ways exacerbates the problem. So here we have a radiator, an old-fashioned radiator, if you will, without the cover on. You'll see to the left that the control valve that allows the amount of heat to be generated in this old steam radiator, for example, still functional, still great. Really, these are fabulous in many ways. But you'll notice right here below the control valve and a scutcheon plate. Those are scutcheon plates, and they're very, very common, around plumbing and what have you. That one's should be adjusted so that it's tight, because where that valve enters that wooden floor, right below it, if the mouse has a tiny little crevice of 6 millimeters or a hole the size of a dime, they're going to harbor up down there and build up in numbers and radiate. Sorry for the pun, but radiate from there out to kitchens and other areas. More of the same. We could go on forever. We're not going to on the radiated mice, but that is a dig out. We dug out that wall void there, and what you see is all rodent nesting material that was stuffed in there next to the toasty warm large radiator that actually was heating a large living room environment in this case. We have our box clutter mice. This is obvious. I'm just showing mice love cardboard. I actually wrote years ago a paper on, the ecology of cardboard boxes, and someone might say, how can there possibly be an ecology associated with cardboard? And well, there is, in the truest sense of the word of the ecology is the total picture of what happens when we build a cardboard box. And then we stack them. Then we put them out of hard traditions above our heads. And then the mice find the box that is least moved, least bumped, least vibrations, and sits for years. And the box becomes a mouse house. And again, we can put traps on the floor. We can put glue boards on the floor. We can use poison baits and bait stations, and we can go on forever. But to get to the mouse problem, in this particular case, or in common case of apartments where we start stacking boxes and closets in our bedrooms, underneath beds, and the typical thing, many times the quickest and safest and best approach is we methodically just do a box accounting and inventory and take care of the mice in the boxes. Finally, we have mice that will divide up the apartments, they'll move into furniture. So here we have an apartment, with a family, and as you can see, youngsters and what have you. And this was the family, comfortable gathering TV room kind of thing with a very comfortable couch. And, family gets together, watches TV and movies, and just spends time together. And that couch had a pretty severe mouse infestation. Below all that comfort, where the people are sitting on top, generating heat from their bodies, generating right through the couch into the bottom of the bases and the insulation in the back, where the mice were sharing those same nights of TV, they're right there until everyone goes to bed, and the mice leave the couches and the chairs and the beds and come out and forage about nearby kitchens and so forth. Very, very common. All those groups I just broke down have to be addressed when we're talking about control. And before I move on, and I'm going to move out of the apartment here, I just want to talk about the building itself has common areas where obviously have to be part of the big picture. And as you might imagine, refuse rooms for any apartment building, the classics and it may be where there's a common dumpster shaft, where people throw their trash down, down the shaft into the base where a compactor is in the bottom and compacts it all and gets compacted and put out for collection. Those walls that you see right there, those pipes go in nearby the garbage shafts, are among the most infested among both mice and rats and roaches, right? Because for the obvious reasons, heavy duty food. And so we have to take care of the common areas in apartment buildings as well. That should be obvious. These are areas where they can serve as reservoirs down in the basement. And as those reservoirs of mice populate the basement areas, right up those walls of all different types, including following the garbage shaft or the elevators or the plumbing tree, and move into people's apartments. So let's take all of that and, of course, start putting it together. Obviously, hopefully we have an understanding of the big picture of mice in apartments. The purpose of this webinar is, okay, so what do we do? What is it doable? Can we do it? Is it impossible? Can we never get control? Are we trying to bail out the ocean with the teaspoon? All of those questions, when you're there, sometimes go floating through our heads. Boy, it seems overwhelming. I'm going to just state something that has to be stated. And even though it seems on paper like, well, no kidding. But the fact of the matter is, what I often find over the years is we aren't organized. We don't cooperate. Mouse control in these buildings is truly integrated. And I use that because we're being literal here. We all know integrated pest management, but we have to be integrated among our parties that are affected. So, of course, we're going to do IPM, but we also have to do integrated communication. There's no way mouse control is going to be done in multifamily housing other than, if there's an apartment or two that has one or two mice, okay, we can put that on number 3 completely. Most cases, however, it becomes the building has an issue, not just tenants have an issue. So it does start, absolutely begins from the get-go with whoever owns that property. It starts there. Then the employees of that property, of the one that everyone knows, building supers and maintenance staff, must be involved, absolutely must be involved. Doesn't necessarily mean they must be involved in actually doing the control, but they must be involved in understanding where repairs have to be made and the kinds of repairs and the kinds of foams and no foams and so forth and so on. Number 3, obviously, without a doubt, this is a no-brainer. The tenants are involved and must hold a responsibility for the share of, if mice do one way or the other move into an apartment, we have to deny them as much food as possible and as much extraneous garbage as possible, like the boxes, like the clutter. Those kinds of things are totally in control of the tenant. So too is the detailed cleaning. If that's not done right and correctly, then it's going to negate sincere efforts by the property owner and the maintenance staff and the pest professional. So that's important and that's obvious. The reason I stress it, however, is sometimes I will hear at meetings where infestations have gotten out of control. Sometimes the finger pointing starts and somebody will say from the property, well, what do you expect? The tenants are not keeping their places clean. And so, of course, we can't get rid of these mice. Well, that's not entirely true. And nor is it true for tenants to say, well, this is something where the owner needs to get a better pest control company. They're not getting it done. But the finger pointing starts, and we go on for these decades like we're going on, and this mouse is in their nooks and crannies, if you will, maybe giving us a standing ovation that we just don't seem to be cooperating among ourselves. Number 4, and it's not a last but not least situation, but we're going to need contracted pest professionals. Absolutely. We're going to need contracted pest professionals. And I want to stress that this is not a case, in my opinion, and I think every pest professional, if you're on this line, if you're on this webinar, you'd weigh in as well. This is not a case of low bid. If this is low bid to get the lowest price, so someone can only spend 2 minutes per apartment, put down a glue board and run out, we're never going to get rid of those mice in that building. We will harvest them. We will capture some. We will have a peak and valley of good, bad over months. But the object, hopefully, because this is a public health pest, is just like bed bugs. We want control. We want this problem taken care of. Otherwise, everyone would have to agree like, oh, by the way, you'd have to put up with some mice living here. We just can't seem to get it done, right? I always say, and I stick with it, for people that do own properties and apartment buildings and agencies, low bid equals high risk, because pest control is not something that should be low bid when you're dealing with public health and the health of people that live inside apartments. No one can perform great pest control for only pennies. Just can't do it. I always teach, and I've been teaching a long time, quite frankly, as Susan mentioned, seminars and university and what have you. But the big picture and control is pest exclusion is pest prevention, and pest prevention, of course, is public health. In fact, for the public health staff and experts that are maybe at this webinar, we know that inherent into the definition of public health, when you look into its origins and its definition, and if you go on right now into Wikipedia or any place, what is public health? The word prevention anchors the whole concept of public health. And can we prevent pest problems and mouse problems or rodent problems in multifamily housing? The answer is absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. So, sometimes I hear people say, oh, what are you going to do? You live in a city. You can't prevent mice from getting into a building in a city. I don't subscribe to that at all. I'd say, every once in a while, they will get in, even with good programs, but we can stop it from becoming massive infestations. Without a doubt, exclusion, smartest and not difficult nor expensive, right? So if we start with the whole IPM concept, I'm going to bet everyone realizes IPM means building them out, keeping things clean, non-chemical, last resort chemical, and monitoring is part of the process. You have to have monitoring involved in this. But the smartest, going all the way back, to the classic textbooks on urban pest management and urban ecology and urban health, is we keep these animals and pests out as best as we can, as often as we can. So this is typical. This is the utility room of a multifamily housing complex. Very typical. Part of the reason we see all the leaks around the door is there's an attitude among human beings like, look, it's a utility room. It's the refuse room. We're in and out of these doors all the time. What's the point? The point is, every light leak we see there, when everyone's gone home for the night to rest up and start their work day the next day, those mice are coming in, following all the grease, all the odors, all the refuse rooms. Those doors have to be mouse-proofed. They have to be. If we're not going to do that right there, many things that follow, no matter who gets a list of apartments to service, it's kind of like a moot point, and we will do that forever. So exclusion, that one's obvious. But let me go back. If we do this with doors, we have to have door sweeps. We have to know which door sweeps. We have to know which are the right caulks, which a caulk isn't right. It's a sealant. We don't want to use foam. There's products out there, and by no means is this an endorsement of anybody's product. But if someone goes out to simply put a weather strip on a door, that's a weather strip. That is not a mouse strip. And so there's companies that provide the right materials, and the instructions to install them and so forth, like the Excluder company, like the Seal Easy company. There's materials that can be purchased and done right. A golden rule I always live by in teaching is a weather strip is not a pest strip. Rodents nor air currents do not. So when someone puts a vinyl weather strip below a door and says, okay, that should keep them out, it's only going to keep out the air currents or keep in the air currents for weatherproof, for saving energy and so forth. But we want to really know what we're doing here. This, as I stressed earlier, this is completely wrong. This will be a temporary gap for sure, and it can do it. And depending on how thick the foam is, it may be a while. But in general, it's not the correct pest management at all. And whenever I see it on someone trying to do pest control, it always speaks of, a lack of understanding or training into what really should be done. So there's products out there. Again, you can go online. This particular company, they make, over the past, I think, 10 years, they've gotten very specialized on pest proofing doors and what have you. But there's other companies that make brushes and seals and what have you. So, what we don't want to do is this jury rig of shove a rock in there, use a little putty or duct tape. And that right there, I took these pictures because the mice are coming and going from that. This is out of my own textbook. And this shows a mouse only needs 6 millimeters in height, 1/4 of an inch to get through. For what it's worth, I'll just throw it into this webinar that, mice and rats cannot flatten out their bodies to get through doors and underneath doors. And for the people that are new to this topic on this webinar, that's a common myth, is they flatten out, or they have soft cartilage that enables them to nearly flatten out. The point of the matter is, if that skull, top of the skull, if you measure it, I'm just going to round off just by a shaving here, 6 millimeters for the mouse and 12 for the rat. If that skull can get through that crevice over here, the body is flexible enough, just like your backbone's flexible when you dance and do the limbo and so forth and so on. They can squeeze through tight spaces. Here is a double door in a high-end multifamily housing complex, and you can see, in fact, to the right there is Dr. Matt Fry from Cornell Extension, and Matt and I are working together on exclusion projects all the time and what have you. And I asked Matt, would you just please point to the gap, we'll use that term, between these two beautiful doors. Are they pest-proofed at the bottom? Yes, they are. Nothing's getting through the bottom. But those doors, those high-end doors in this beautiful apartment building, the mice have 24/7, 365 access. And the important point is, once mouse goes through one mouse, it begets more mice because they will leave an odor trail that rarely is going to be cleaned up with a toothbrush down there by anybody. And so that has to be fixed. And there's materials easily to fix that. But that's called the astrogal space. That space between two doors is the astrogal. And there's technology and there's materials and there's like easy expertise to seal that up. It doesn't matter what the doors look like. Until that's sealed up, that is wide open, 100% to in fact, in that case, to rats as well. So once they're in, if somebody gets damaged or wires get chewed on or somebody gets hurt, then that might come back to the property owners. Well, you're letting the rodents in. Why not? Why weren't the doors done correctly? So that's not a job necessarily, a responsibility of the pest professional or the tenant. That's on the property owner. We could go on forever here. This is another back door. You know, in this case, a maintenance person, you know, I don't know, made an attempt to reduce the air current loss and intake and what have you, but they used weather strips. You left a big gap there that is 24/7, 365, huge gap for rodents. If you don't use the right materials, they gnaw right through them. You know, and again, rodents they're successful because the word rodent means to gnaw. That's why they're called rodents. That's translation. Rodent means to gnaw. And so you put up a vinyl strip, even a heavy duty vinyl strip, and those mice and rats, you can see their tooth marks, very powerful. And I will share with you, I've handled a lot of mice in my time, alive mice. And if I don't get a good grip on them behind their head, I've had mice lock onto my finger to where I was in a lot of pain. But what my brain was saying is, wow, are they powerful jaws? So you have to use the right materials. This is not the right material. This is not done correctly. This is a homeowner's approach to just stuff some steel wool in a hole and that should keep them out. Well, you know, it's not going to last very long. Might it do it for a couple nights till you can do it right? Sure. But you want to do it right. And ideally, that particular space, as I'll come back to it, needs an escutcheon plate, not foam, not something just stuffed in there that can shimmy loose and what have you. It needs to be done correctly. And speaking of escutcheon plate, so here we have the very classic below a kitchen sink in every kitchen, your kitchen, apartment kitchens, bathrooms, every hotel, everywhere we go, this is our lives right here because we use sinks. So we have the drain, the main drain line, obviously dropping down, making its S-curve back into the hook up to the plumbing tree. And in this particular case, not bad. We see the hot water and the cold water. We see the escutcheon plates behind the valves, sealed to the backing of this particular cabinet. And the good news is there's escutcheon plates there. Many, sometimes, someone will jury rig it, put them through, say, we don't need a escutcheon plate, and they'll just leave it as is, or worse, they'll put a foam plug in. But here we have 3 escutcheon plates. That's what we need. We need the escutcheon plate on the drain, and in this particular case, it happens to meet that back wall after it's cut through this, you know, inexpensive backing of the cabinet. It's a pretty tight seal there. Now, I'll inject right here because it's probably important. You know, we're talking about mice, but escutcheon plates are important for cockroaches. They're important for ants. They're important for flies. They're important for bed bugs, and they're important for other occasional invaders that affect the urban environment. So escutcheon plates, to me, are as important as anyone that's going to be spraying anything, anyone that's going to be dusting anything, any door sweeps that are going to be put on, so forth. Escutcheon plates are one of the most important preventative pest management devices that exists. All right, I'll leave with that, but I state that because I'm just amazed as a species, Homo sapiens, people, we don't seal up the most common sense pathways of the urban pests that affect us. Here is an escutcheon plate that I didn't do anything. This is the way it was. So it should be, of course, sealed to that wall where you see my blue arrow so that nobody can come and go and from this angle, you can't see it so great, but all the pink with the dark smears on it here, that's mouse grease. And so we have these animals living in the warm wall, tiled wall here, and coming from a very tiny or large enough, 6 millimeters, come and go, dropping down and running along, infesting and leaving droppings and urine everywhere. That is scratch and plate. There's one there, it just needs to be done correctly and affixed to the wall. Obviously, in integrated pest management, we want to have sanitation and decluttering. Decluttering, very critical. General cleanup, you know. Now, the question is, and I have to 0 crumbs. You know, again, because just one little crumb every night, a 2-gram chip off a saltine or, you know, a raisin or two, everyone likes to think of how much can feed a mouse. Well, it's true. 2 to 4 grams is just a pinch of food. And can we all, in our busy lives, keep our places clean so that we starve mice? Well, it's a little challenging, but once we get there and maintaining it's not difficult. But if we haven't been trying to detail clean, then of course we're going to spend several hours on a weekend doing it. But can we keep the floors and the areas clean enough to stress a mouse out so it doesn't have a large litter? Yes, we can. Right? So, and boxes are key. Furniture in all the rooms, vacuuming behind those, appliances in the kitchen, everything we started out with, that has to be addressed by tenants. There's no doubt about it. And that comes with education and fact sheets, because many people, even that are living a, you know, what they would feel is a average level of sanitation, most times, again, all you need to do is move the refrigerator or move something out and say, oops, we've been overlooking that. So, but can't stress, obviously, without sanitation, we're going to feed the mice and, of course, roaches and so forth. Sorry. All right, so mouse traps, if we move on to actually control materials, everyone knows the proverbial mouse traps, and everyone's familiar with them. You know, the professional, the homeowner, they go way back, you know, for over 100 years, there's been mouse traps available in all different configurations and types, and many myths associated with mouse traps and rat traps, for example. You know, I hear it all the time, and the question I get all the time, what's the best bait to put on a mouse snap trap? You know, and the answer actually is there is not a best bait. It's the best thing to ask is, what have the mice been feeding on in the kitchen? And if it's multiples of food are the best bait across many traps. So, but they are effective for minor infestations. The best thing, if it can be done, is pest professionals that are experienced and trained. Right now, I'm going to say here, you know, can a homeowner take care of a mouse or two in their apartment, their house, if it's just a mouse or two, with putting out maybe 6 or 8 traps set in the areas where they see them active? Probably, you know, probably. So, but if it's more than that, you know, most homeowners are not trained, not experienced to realize that, look, you may have 8 mice, and let's just say you capture 6. And the last 2 are pregnant females. Well, you know, you can see where I'm going with this is that can go on for a long period of time. And for every day a mouse is still allowed to share your dwelling, there's another day where possible transmission of something or gnawing on wires or allergens and so forth. So I do stand by the words, it's best done by experienced pest professionals. And I'm going to come back to that too, because I want to stress experienced pest professionals, quality pest professionals, just like quality anything else. So people always ask, can I do this myself? I only have 1 mouse, and I sold 1 mouse. That's all I've seen. And, you know, so I always grant, look, a couple of mice, yes. Maybe it's a do-it-yourself thing if it's just a few. But if we miss, if it's not done right, down in yellow is the payoff. And that is, you know, mice are successful in apartment buildings because, of course, they reproduce very quickly. In fact, you know, realistically, if you have a pair of mice and no one does anything with them and they're in any kind of a building that's comfortable for them, like a large apartment building, at the end of the year, you can have 2,000 mice. So this is an animal where we can't afford to not do it right. And so it's be careful with the do-it-yourself decision. We can put out mouse traps and should put them out in a professional manner. I'm just showing an option here, fairness. I'm using a box, a mouse box. You could use any box. You could take an empty cardboard box and cut a couple of holes in them and put them out. But in generally, mouse traps are best when they're put into boxes of some sort and then put out into the high activity areas of mice that we discussed, right? And what you put in those mouse traps for bait, generally mice are just like us. They want a nutritional balance of food. So I might put a little oatmeal. I might put a little piece of chocolate. I might put something that, been common around the kitchen that is cooked with, because they're going to be familiar with those tastes and residues, what have you. And I might even also put a little soft nesting material, in case as a pregnant female, she has a high affinity for collecting anything that's soft, like dental floss. They love dental floss for their nest. They love little pieces of paper for their nest, and they will get caught in traps going for those materials. Here's a rodent trap set by a radiator, by a pest control company. They put this out, and it's a common area where the mice are running along the baseboard. And in fact, to the left of this trap, all this marking you can see into the wood, all of this, that is heavy staining by a mouse pausing at that point and urinating over and over and over again, transmitting pheromones. They follow the wall around, and you'll see that there is some copper mesh that was stuffed into a hole, and that hole led to the bottom of that floor area where this radiator is generating heat. And right below that corner area where my arrow is, right down here, is a mouse nest. Okay, so this is the classic use of a trap to try to stop them as they're passing through. There are many different kinds of traps out there. Everyone probably knows the famous expression back in the 1800s, if you build a better mousetrap, the world will be the pathway to your door. It actually wasn't referring to the mousetrap literally, but just to a concept. But nevertheless, everyone since then there's now thousands of patents on mouse traps. Many are effective. The bar types of mouse traps, our research at Purdue University back years ago, we found that the bar types tend to be the most effective, where the bar actually swings around and comes down versus other models. If we looked at just an apartment, or house, I'm using a house here. If I had just 1 or 2 mice in my apartment or house, this would be the type of thing I might do. I'd put 2 traps beneath the sink. I'd put 2 behind the stove, 2 behind the refrigerator. If I had a garage or I had a big storage room in an apartment, I may put 4 to 6 nearby any places that's heat. In the basement of an apartment building, the sill plate has to be thoroughly trapped in any basement because mice love sill plates. The area is right below the first floor. And if there's any attic spaces or storage spaces within an apartment, those areas, they have to be also receive several traps in those areas. So that's a simplified, trapping approach, to these animals. We have glue traps. Glue traps have to be used correctly, just like the snap traps. They have to be put in the right areas. They can be effective, but they are not as effective as snap traps, but they offer some good monitoring. You can capture cockroaches in those. You can see if, what's going on with other insect pests in the area. But when we're using glue traps, I would say judiciously compared to snap traps. However, glue traps offer a big advantage that snap traps do not. And that is, if you have an infestation, say, in a box, you can surround that box with glue traps and gently open the box. And as the mice come running around, they'll be captured in those glue traps. And so they have some real advantages to use when employed correctly. And so we can capture these animals on glue traps and what have you. Of course, they're sometimes put out by lay people and amateurs and what have you, and they create problems and end up stuck to wheels or stuck to people's furniture or stuck to dog tails or sometimes even babies' hands and so forth. And so glue traps have to be used very, very carefully. And finally, as we wrap up on the tools, everyone knows we have mouse bait, we have rodent bait. And baits are appropriate for ongoing chronic infestations, because sometimes it would be much too much work, much too labor intensive to get large infestations if we just tried it with traps. And as you can see there in my second paragraph, and if used professionally with professional bait stations, baits are safe and efficient strategies. And to this day, baits are probably the number one go-to tool for most mouse control in multifamily housing buildings everywhere. Now, I want to stress, because some people will, they'll say, I get nervous when we start talking about using poisons inside apartments that may have dogs or children and so forth. And that applies to all approaches, snap traps, glue boards, baits, anything we do with pest control, there's hazards if we're not careful. And it's no different here. However, for the amount of bait that's going to be typically used for some mice in an apartment, unless it's something really seriously out of control, the risk, like everything else, tends to be low. It tends to be low. But I want to stress, and I'm going to show that there are people that don't understand how much is correct to use. And there's people that will go down to the big box store and buy their own bait or order it online. And they will use it incorrectly and put it out, as I'm going to show you. And of course, we're going to have issues and hazards and maybe children or pets getting into it. That is completely all unacceptable. So I can see there, you can see twice, I'm repeating the word professional. So there are professional bait stations. There, right here is an online picture of a leading manufacturer. And in the bottom here, we see a mouse station. The two above it, the large ones, are for rats. Down below is what's called a ready-to-use, RTU station, with some poison bait. You'll see there's keys here when these bait stations are closed down. When they are closed down, they lock. And I can tell you that when that bait station locks, you can stand on that small mouse station. You cannot crush it. Even if you weigh several hundred pounds, you're not crushing that box. So that's how they look. These can be put out into areas. Here's one in an apartment, put out, mice enter, they feed on the bait. Several days later, they expire. In most cases, from an anticoagulant. Here's what it looks like when I open up the bait box. There's one feeding of a mouse, scraping off just a gram or two of bait, which will take care of that mouse. And that is, as a general rule, but it's not the only rule, one block like that many times can kill 8 to 10 mice because they eat small amounts and so forth. So these get put out. So as I wrap up here, I just want to mention, here's what never should be done. Not by a homeowner, not by anyone that calls themselves, quote, a professional pest control person. Bait like that, that's completely unprofessional. That bait will get scattered. I took these pictures. This mouse is not staged. This is the real deal. Mice, like squirrels, will collect their little tiny, quote, acorns, if you will, and they will carry them and store them. So they will drop them wherever they tend to drop them. And even though, for example, right there, that's poison bait, but is there enough there to realistically harm a dog or a child? The answer is no, but we don't want any of these baits ending up with anybody other than the targeted rodents, period, right? Period. So that's the bottom line. And it's not a discussion on toxicology and dose makes poison. It's just they belong no place but with the animals. Any homeowner, exterminator, anybody that tosses baits that they bought either online or at a box store, and they're like just tossing them about or wedging them behind stoves or refrigerator, those are all illegal placements. They're all dangerous. We don't want to pose hazards to, of course, to children, pets, wildlife. It's illegal. And this is where, again, sometimes people think, well, heck, it's sold on the shelf, and it said put these in areas where, you see the mice and the rats. That's where the experienced professional comes in, hopefully, of saying, no, some placements just do not make sense. This is soft bait that is now available, comes in little 10 grams sachets, and this soft bait, you can grab a whole handful with one hand into a bucket of bait, and I've seen custodians throw them into crawl spaces, throw them into laundry rooms, throw them into refuse rooms, figuring the mice and will pick them up and all eat them, and I've killed all the mice quickly. The mice will pick up those sachets and they'll move them to wherever they want. This happens to be the back of an appliance. And so that's all rodenticide poisons right there. It's all bait. And when you do get enough, if a dog was to get into eating 8, 10, 12 packets of these baits, now we are talking serious toxicosis of those dogs. Now we will harm those animals. They will need veterinary care or physician's care. So anyone throwing bait, tossing bait, illegally putting out bait, doing anything like that has no place in a do-it-yourself market. We're dealing with killing mammals. Finally, everybody, because we do want to, as Suzanne mentioned, we want to leave enough time. There's another approach that is taken out there, and I want to end with just 1 or 2 points here. There's a tracking powder out there that's labeled as a restricted use pesticide, RUP, for professional use only. And there are some pest control people, I'm not sure I want to go professionals if they do this, but they will make massive applications of those powders. They'll say, I'm going to dust for the mice, or I'm going to dust for the rats. And they will far dust above what the label recommends. And there's even some people say, I guarantee you I will get rid of the mice in your apartment. And are you going to use traps? Nope. Are you going to use baits? Nope. And they will go in, they'll dust all the wall voids. They will dust below floors. They will dust ceilings with these, quote, dusts. And they aren't dust, but they'll call them dust. So any pest control person says, I've got some dust that takes care of this. You want to make sure that everyone's looking at the label, reading the label, looking at the amounts, and it's done correctly. Otherwise, it's highly illegal and highly toxic. So, but they do have a place among professionals for certain applications. But I find they're misused tremendously out there. This is my last slide, actually, and I just wanted to end perhaps on a light note, because this is a pretty darn heavy topic, and I think it deserves to be a heavy topic. But I will show you that I took this picture in a supermarket I was working in one night in the middle of the night, trying to put together a program to get rid of the mice in the supermarket. And I kept hearing a thumping over and over and over again down in this aisle. And I just, where's that thumping coming from? And it was a bunch of cat food, and it was behind a whole bunch of boxes of this product, Friskies. So I very gently took out the boxes, and a mouse jumped up and away and disappeared. But it looked to me what the mouse was doing was just making these running attacks at the throat of this cat and ripping off the cat's fur right in a particular area. And that's how it went down right there. So whether something was going on there in a higher scheme of things, I have no idea. But that right there is a true story. So Susanna, I'm going to turn it back over to you for our question and answer period.
Great.
And we'll go from there. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. That was great. We've got a number of questions, and I'll try to get through them. I just want to say, if I don't get to your question, send me a follow-up email, and I'll address it, or I'll ask Dr. Corrigan to address it, and we'll send you an email response. And I'll try to compile these questions and put them on the website as well. So one statement, one question, which I think is more of a statement that I just wanted to present to the whole group was, and I answered already, but one of the attendees said, even if you don't see or hear a mouse, they can be there, which was a question. And I said, yes, of course, yes. So I just wanted to make that clear to everyone that, correct, right? Even if you don't hear or see them, we do often have mouse infestations. So one question I get pretty frequently is, do rodenticides cause the mice to leave the building and search for water?
No, they do not. No, and we can keep that one short. It's never
Yep.
been. There's no association between them feeding on the bait and leaving the building for water. It would be nice if that happened, but it doesn't.
Yeah, I just wanted to make that a point, so because I continue to hear that, so it's a good one
Yes.
to address. Um, the other question I get frequently is mint oil. Do you want to talk about mint oil as a preventative or as a deterrent?
Yes. So there are products on the market and on the shelves and what have you that use the essential oils of wintergreen and various types of plants from the mint family. And there's some claims made that those are highly repellent to rodents, and by using them or spraying things, you can repel mice out of areas or away. Um, the best thing to do with anything that makes claims of mouse control, roach control, any control, is do just a little bit of homework and see if you can find any scientific data produced by a decent research and published someplace that has proven, it's been vetted, if you will, by scientists through the scientific process that shows, statistically well done under real world conditions, these things did what they say they are claiming to do. And if you cannot find that, and I often suggest to people, please, go online, check the .edu sites, talk to maybe some entomologists or pest specialists, and do a little bit of a digger deep. Because right now, I don't think there's, if any, really strong, credible data that shows the mint oil types of compounds have much of a role in rodent control. And if someone develops something better and it's simple. Do the research, get the data, show us the results.
Okay, this one, maybe I was paying attention to the comments and you might have addressed already, but maybe worth repeating. This person described a situation where their condo association traps in the laundry room, the utility room, but they're not finding mice. She hears them, or he or she hears them between the walls, but they're trapping or baiting outside. And I think that's something that I've learned from you is that all of the baiting done around, you can have a bait box every 5 feet around a building, but I think what you're getting at, just to sum up, is they're inside the building already. That's going to do no good. Correct?
Yes, correct. So the point is, if you have the amounts of infestation that's inside, in the walls, in the ceilings, in the appliances, in the furniture, obviously those are resident animals. They are living within. They are living within the building envelope and/or the apartments specifically. Anything done outside is really not going to impact them. Now, may the exterior bait boxes and trap stations would have helped to stem off future incoming? Perhaps, but they are not going to touch the interior animals whatsoever. That has to be done by systematically going through room by room and addressing those animals, just like we would do for bed bugs.
Right. And this one I already answered in the chat, but it's worth mentioning to everybody that we get questions on those sonic devices, and there is no research to back up that those are effective, correct, in deterring mice.
Right. So on ultrasonic devices, they have a long history, probably 30 years of being available in the marketplace. And there is no strong research to show that under real world conditions, that they have any promise at all. There are papers that have been published by pest control scientists that show they do not work. So it's a situation where, again, you want to do your homework, you want to dig a little bit deeper, you want to see if there's any sound science to back up any device or any spray or any material that's making claims that sound too good to be true. Usually it's like anything else. It may be too good to be true. Mm-hmm. So rely on science. Now, can there be some type of breakthroughs in science where, certain devices could be changed? Yeah, we have to remain totally open to that. But, you want to ask for data. You want to ask for research.
Yeah. Okay. Logistical question: How do you seal up the escutcheon plate to the wall? How is that sealed to the wall?
Very simply, sealing a sketching plate to the wall, it just requires a good quality sealant, and even in this case, you could use a good quality silicone caulk because you're dealing with it only a very small space there. You put a bead of that around the edge of the escutcheon plate, and you just shimmy that right into that bead, into the wall, into that area. Now, some of the escutcheon plates, they come, and there's variations on this, but some escutcheon plates will come with screw holes, depending on what they are closing a hole for. And so sometimes screws are used and they're screwed into the surface, but so that's nothing complex. And the important point is the escutcheon plate is in place and it is adhered to the wall or affixed to the wall in some form or fashion.
Okay. A couple questions on the pros and cons of kill traps versus lethal rodenticides, and the issue with the dead mice decomposing in the walls and the smell from that. What are the situations where should you always use kill traps? We use them both. What are the situations where you would use one over the other?
Great question. So, with all the tools, there's, as you can imagine, pluses and minuses to every single tool. However, if it's a large infestation of mice, and where if you were to only use, say, poison baits, it's very likely you would have an odor problem. All these animals dying in inaccessible places, back in the nest, and them smelling. So many times the strategy professionals will take, and smart strategy, is, we get everybody to clean up as much as we can. We declutter as much as we can. Again, sounds just like bed bugs. And then we might install, several dozen mouse traps and repeatedly mouse to knock the population way down. You will have mice, for example, that will not interact with those traps. And that's why you need this integrated approach. And so after massive trapping, you can then go in and install mouse baits, professionally used inside tamper-resistant boxes, as I've showed, to remove the last few mice. A mouse having low body mass, as I stressed earlier, a mouse when it dies back in its nest someplace, in many, many cases, not all, but in many cases, there is no odor. It's just the biomass is too low. And so the decomposing body doesn't generate a lot of gases that produce the odor. And by the way, that's where the myth came from when we first started with baits, that I didn't smell anything. They must have left the building to die, or they must have gone looking for water, but I never smelled anything. So a few mice with baits is not going to be an issue for odors. And if it's massive.
Excuse me.
Suzanne?
Sorry. No. Go on.
We're still there?
Yes.
Okay. So a few mice usually are not going to be a major odor problem. But if there's any sensitivity to that, if someone says, any odor, I don't want it whatsoever, then that's a case-by-case basis is okay. So as best you can, continue on with the smart approach of keeping things clean and cluttered, and use some snap traps.
Okay, sorry, I was fiddling and I didn't realize I was not muted. We got a comment that from someone at HUD that says, if I recall correctly, we collected allergen samples in the National Survey of U.S. Housing in 2000. The cockroach and mice allergens were positively correlated, not surprising because both are supported by similar conditions. But curious if the roaches are a source of food for mice. And then just kind of, I don't think we have the answer for this one, but there was an inverse relationship between mice and cat allergens. So the cat question, let's address these two questions. Are roaches a source of food for mice?
Yes, they are. And they're a common source of food. And I myself, when doing cockroach clean out, sometimes all the roaches would come running out as I'm working. If there were mice in the apartment, I'd see the mice emerge from their hiding spots, gobbling up all the roaches I was killing. And if you talk to pest professionals, it's very, very common to see that. There's been a paper published in Journal of Mammalogy or a similar referee journal showing that exact relationship. The mouse is a predator on many, many insects, many mice on many different insects, and including the urban sector where the house mouse is a predator on the German cockroach and the American cockroach. It's full of protein, it's full of nutrition, it's full of moisture. So yes on that. On the cat question, many times people say, well, suppose I kept a cat in my apartment or two cats in my apartment or in the apartment building downstairs in the refuse room. Will that help? And the answer to that is that's case-by-case basis. There's some evidence in certain situations where the presence of some cats will deter mice if those mice have alternatives. So it may be that apartment 2B, let's just say, has a cat or two cats, and apartment 2C is easily accessible by the mice and has equally the same conditions of food and what have you. Those mice may inhabit 2C. They'll go to where there is no threat and life is a bit easier. However, in many cases, if the mice find a really good apartment, fits their needs, plenty of places to hide, plenty of places to escape the cat, and the cat is kept well fed, there'll be zero impact of that cat on those mice. And in fact, again, if you talk to the thousands and thousands of pest management professionals that service dog apartments, cat apartments, dog buildings, cat buildings, many, many times you'll see some of the worst rodent infestations you've ever seen, and there's the presence of both cats and dogs or one or the other. So it is case by case. It may work here and there, but would I depend on cats to help me? I really would not.
And while we're on the cat theme, there's a question about secondary poisoning. When mice die from bait, if a cat or a dog gets the dead mouse, will it harm the cat or the dog?
Not in the typical scenario. If it's a small amount, let's just say a cat was to eat a mouse or two that fed on the bait, assimilated the bait, digested the bait, and perished from the bait, and the cat consumed that entire mouse, is there a realistic toxicological threat to that cat or dog? And the answer is no, there's not. Would it be picked up in an assay, some type of assay that a veterinarian or someone might say, well, technically we found the active ingredient for that bait now in the cat? Yes, you probably would. But is it of any life threat to that cat? No. Would it harm its health? Probably not. However, if a cat, let's just say some scenario where every single day dead mice are falling dead from someone massively baiting a bunch of mice in, say, the refuse room of a big apartment building, and those cats are not being fed by humans and they are hungry, of course, day in, day out, if they were to consume those mice that would be poisoned day in, day out repeatedly, they would accumulate enough of the toxic active ingredient that it could kill that cat secondarily. But it takes quite a bit.
Oh, two questions regarding trapping. One is, does the human scent on a trap deter mice? On a snap trap, setting a snap trap or baiting?
No, it does not. And the reason it does not is mice and rats, they've learned our scent, which is all over everything, of which they're sharing the apartment with and the house with. Our scent is, in many cases, a hint to them like, well, humans have been here, where humans are often is their foods and stuff. So our scent on a trap, they don't pick it up as a risk. They're just totally familiarized with it, and it offers no deterrent whatsoever.
Do mice become bait or trap shy and require removal of traps or bait stations to allow them to forget about them and become curious again?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer to that is, if you have a population of mice, let's just say we have, 20 mice in an apartment, which is realistic when the infestation has gotten a foothold. Some of those mice actually will develop a behavioral response to any kind of dangers, whether it's a mousetrap or even a book that fell down and made a loud noise on the shelves or something like this. They are mammals. Mice and rats are smart mammals. They learn from experience. We now know that, they're much smarter than we ever give them credit for. And so do they develop behavioral resistance to traps? Yes, right? And we now have mouse populations in different parts of the world. We've caught them on film. They also develop resistance to entering into the bait boxes with the poisons, right? So that is why, and that's probably increasing as the years go by, and that is why the smartest thing we could do for mice is keep them out of our buildings through good exclusion and keeping things tidy, and then rely on the traps and baits and everything else as the last resort. Otherwise, we're going to, constantly repeat this mistake.
Mm-hmm. What about using birth control medication and bait traps to get at the breeding populations?
Well, so far there is no real strong product that has come forth for birth control for mice. There is a product on the horizon that is being looked at for rats, and it's gone through several of the early stages of research for rats in urban environments. We need to keep an eye on those technologies, those biotechnologies as they develop, and see what promises they offer in the future for rats and for mice. So it would be hopeful, but keep in mind, even if we had a quota birth control that we put out in apartments or buildings for mice, and a mouse is still running around your apartment, even if it's no longer capable of having babies, it's still running around your apartment, and it's still urinating things, still defecating, still chewing on wires, still may have ectoparasites, still may be transmitting diseases. So, it'd be hard to say, well, don't worry, it's not going to have babies. It'll only live another couple of months. That's a long time. No, we need that animal removed. Mm-hmm. So does it have promise in the future? I hope so. And let's keep an eye on it.
I'm going to paraphrase this one a little bit. When you're looking at a building, how do you prioritize your management strategies, indoor versus outdoors? Like, what are the first steps? Focus on the indoor population or the outside population getting in?
I'm probably going to, put them all together. I'm going to concurrently start mouse-proofing that building. I want those doors mouse-proofed. I want all penetrations into the building mouse-proofed. Might as well stop anybody that's coming in ASAP. But certainly, I would begin to, triage my attack. I want the most infested apartments first, secondary, third, and work my way back out. And I want to do a complete assessment of the whole building, the refuse room, the utility rooms, the community areas, go through the building, who's got the worst problems. And because if you don't attack those bad apartments, the ones that really may have 20, 40, 60 mice, they will serve as reservoirs for everybody else moving up and down through those utility chases. And one apartment can cause 20 apartments, again, sounds like bed bugs, 20 apartments to have a really severe problem. So it's a matter of getting organized, but the outside to me is not going to be a major issue other than me getting my doors mouse-proofed ASAP.
Mm-hmm. Oh, this is a good one. Should those who are baiting for mice be licensed or certified?
You're right, Susanna, that is a good one. In my opinion, the answer to that is yes. I don't think pesticides, especially pesticides that are used to kill rodents, rats and mice, I don't think they belong in the hands of the consumer. It's nothing against the consumer. We can do plenty of do-it-yourself kinds of things, but now we're talking about putting out pesticides that, if they're not done correctly, can kill dogs and have killed dogs, can poison children, have poisoned children, because, it does take skill and experience to use them safely. So in my opinion, pesticides that kill small mammals, rats and mice and chipmunks, do not belong in the hands of off-the-shelf do-it-yourselfers. That's my opinion, because I've seen too many things gone wrong by, people meaning well, but just don't have enough understanding of what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I like this one. This is something I've wondered about myself. Typical hardware cloth heavy-duty wire mesh is composed of quarter-inch wire mesh. Is this the typical material used for crawl space vents? Can mice squeeze through quarter-inch mesh?
Quarter-inch hardware cloth, galvanized so it doesn't rust, when used appropriately, is sufficient to keep out mice and rats. Even though it's quarter-inch, and we'll say, well, they only need a quarter of an inch to get beneath the door and these kinds of things, it is also the configuration that's important. And so when you have quarter-inch grid of these small quarter-inch squares, they can't fit through that little grid, their whole body, and work their arms through after. However, when you have a linear crack or crevice that is uniform, and they can get the quarter-inch head below there, then working their arms and their legs and the rest of the body, they can do. But hardware cloth, quarter-inch, galvanized metal will do it, and that will keep out mice and rats.
Okay, these are quick ones. I think I know the answer to this one. Well, the anticoagulant baits posing a risk to raptors, my answer would be the mice are house mouse. They're not going to be outside, and they would rarely go outside after they've consumed the bait. Are they? So I would say it's probably not a risk to raptors. What's the answer you
No,
would think?
that of course those are not a risk to raptors whatsoever. However, if there's a whole bunch of bait stations around an apartment building and there
Hmm.
is aggressive pressure there, and those baits are not carefully maintained, and/or raptors thought about if there's a woods nearby, those kinds of things should be considered because exterior rodenticide baits in bait stations, which is not the interior mice, they can pose a risk to raptors if there's a lot of mouse and rat activity on the outside of those buildings. But then I would ask, why are they there? If there's a lot of activity there, it's probably a sanitation issue, dumpsters or something, eliminate that, then we don't have to pose those risks to raptors. Otherwise, we are going to. But indoors, no risk to raptors there.
Oh, this is a great one. I almost missed this. You mentioned the issues with low bid pest control contractors. What are
Yes.
your suggestions on the few key factors for assessing the qualifications of a contractor? I would say put all the details that you want into your bid, but I'll let you answer.
Well, I agree with what you just said, Susanna. I mean, the smart way is to have a well bid, a bid written well to begin with by someone that understands pest management and IPM and the critical factors of what makes up a good mouse control program, a good pest management program. What are the factors? Get those in there, then that is bidded on. But if there's a race to the bottom line by 3 or 4 different companies and say, "Oh, we can half the price from these other companies," usually I would take pause and say, what's at stake here? The tenant's health is at stake, if not even the building itself with all its wiring and so forth. Low bid, high risk. Good bids that are well written, put out for bid by quality companies, then you go from there. And then it has to be checked. Then I would make sure there's a QA program built into that somebody's checking to make sure you're getting the quality that you're paying for, since it's more. I would always have a QA program built into that bid.
Right. I always say if the pest numbers of pests are not going down, then you're not getting what you paid for. So somebody needs to oversee that contract as well.
I agree.
Um, Multi-catch traps, are they effective in apartments in the apartment environment?
My experience has been, and usually from the feedback I see from pest professionals around, the multiple catch traps, the wind-ups and the multiple door traps, it's interesting. They work on a principle where harborage is low. In other words, in warehouses, in commercial accounts where a mouse is always struggling maybe to find a cozy little corner, they investigate those boxes more. Multiple catch traps in apartments and homes and garages tend to be much, much less effective in those areas, probably because in apartments and houses might say, plenty of boxes, plenty of closets, plenty of furniture, plenty of nooks and crannies, and they're much less investigative. So I'd say that wouldn't be my first choice of tools for mice inside apartments.
Okay. And I know I might be missing some, but I'll review these questions and try to get back to people. But one question that um, I think I can answer is cat food. Yes, is a source of food for mice.
Big time.
And Lynn Brabrand just piped in that the iSchool Pest Manager website has examples and templates for bids. Thank you. So iSchool Pest Manager, we'll put that up on the Mouse webinar homepage. And bait station placement indoors. Would you have any locations, best placement behind the stove, refrigerator, dishwasher, or does it just maybe depend on where you're seeing the mice?
So bait stations, my golden rule with those tamper-resistant mouse stations, even though they're tamper-resistant and nobody's getting into those anytime easy, even a strong dog can't get into those correctly. A young child can't get into those. You do need the keys, right? And so still having said that, in most cases, those bait stations should not be visible to anybody at all. Most of the areas where the mice are active are in those hidden nooks and crannies, behind things, behind appliances, tucked under places, and so forth. whether or not a child, for example, an inquisitive child, could get into them technically or not is, to my thinking, moot. That child should not know they're there. The dog should not know they're there, period. And anyway, the mice that are active and thriving tend to be most active in those places I showed where they're out of sight, out of reach, warm nooks and crannies. So as best you can, those should be out of sight. There are cases where it's just maybe two adults in the apartment or something like this, and they're, experienced to know to leave them alone. Cases, exceptions. But in general, you don't need to put them in areas where they're going to be seen.
Okay. The person that asked the question just corrected me and said in-wall or void area bait stations. Is there a difference? Is there a different type of placement for in-wall void area bait station placement?
It depends. In some cases, mice that are in the walls and in the void areas are coming out regularly to access their food and gather up some food. And usually it's an area where, in those cases, you don't have to do anything difficult of actually getting into the walls with the baits, as finding the runway area that still remains relatively hidden or protected under the cabinet or behind the stove or somewhere where you can put that, where it's still, you get your protection and you're still accessing the mice. So, but there's some case where people feel, well, I want to get the little tiny bait box into a wall. And it may be something is from an access panel, from the bath trap, or pulling a plug, or even if it had to be for some reason, drilling a small access panel, putting them in there and fixing it at a later time. But those are very rare cases.
Okay. Well, it's 4 o'clock and we're out of time. If I have not gotten to any of the questions that you guys had left, I'll try to get to you personally, and I'll try to put some of the Q&As up on the website that you should see on the last slide on your screen, the stoppest.org/go/mouse webinar. And keep in touch. If you guys have any questions, you should all have my email address, and you all know where the Stop Pest website is, and I will be happy to answer questions and ask for Bobby's expertise if I cannot answer. So thank you all very much for joining us today, and thank you, Dr. Bobby Corrigan, for presenting this really great information to us. Thanks so much.
Thanks
Have
for
a
the
great day.
invite. It was an honor. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll be ending the presentation, and have a good day, everyone. Take care.
Bye.